Hi guys, it's Andy here from Golfstrong.co.uk and I've got a interview with Karl Morris lined up for you. Thank you for joining us today, Karl.
No problem.
So, a quick introduction from yourself. So who have you had the pleasure of working with?
I've been very lucky over the years to work with a number of top players, major winners such as Darren Clark, Graham McDowell, Louis Oosthuizen, Charles Schwartz in the early days, and former world number one Lee Westwood. So
Awesome.
been pretty fortunate, really.
That's a pretty extensive list, eh? So do these guys suffer from the same frustrations as us? Are they actually human?
Absolutely, probably more so. I think the game of golf makes us incredibly fragile.
That's right,
in the sense that even the very best players, the difference between the best and their worst is probably greater than most sports.
Right.
You know, the current situation that we see with Rory, where you've got a guy going from seemingly invincible to now suddenly really struggling with his game, and that is the nature of the game. That's what golf can do to us. It can create such extremes, and one of the things that's the great enemy of golf is doubt, and so suddenly when that creeps in, we struggle.
Got you. So as you mentioned, Rory's having a bit of trouble at the moment. Do you think that can be created ourselves? So there's good and bad days that we actually form ourselves.
I think the nature of the game creates good and bad days in the sense that there are so many variables. You know, if you hit a perfect drive and it bounces left, it's in a divot. If it bounces right, it's in the perfect position.
Right.
You know, a perfect putt hit on the perfect line doesn't necessarily go in if it hits a spike line.
It.
So there's an incredible amount of variability in the game. You know, the time of day that you get the draw, things like that. But essentially, yeah, we bring a lot of good days and bad days on ourselves in terms of, we fall into bad habits of thinking just in the way that we fall into bad habits of swinging. So I think the very best players get to the point where they really know themselves and they really know what makes them work, and then they can start repeating that.
Got you. Have you got any sort of tips out there that can, when things say are not going your way, like you said, it's not necessarily under our control, but how do you sort of stay neutral, if you like?
And that's one of the key things, is staying neutral about it. I think it might sound very negative, but with all the players I work with, one of the major premises is get them to understand that they will hit bad shots.
Got you.
A lot of
it's
bad
inevitably
shots
going to happen
in a round of golf, but the key thing is how do you react to those bad shots? So the whole thing about, when I'm working with a player, I'll divide every shot into what I call 3 phases, where you've got the pre-swing, the shot, and the post-shot. And actually the only bit that you can really control is the pre-swing and the post-shot. The actual swing itself will always come and go a little bit. So it's getting people to understand it's not so much the bad shot that's the problem, it's more the reaction to it.
I see. Okay, so one of the questions here I had was, is there such a thing as a zone? But I think you've pretty much covered that really, you've got the pre-shot, the shot and the after-shot. Is it possible that, are you suggesting that you're only concentrating through that period of time when you're on the golf course and not?
Completely. I mean, you're on a golf course for 5 hours. It's an impossibility that you could concentrate the total amount of time in anything, really. I mean,
no, that's right.
I believe that traffic controllers are only allowed to work a couple of hours and then they've got to go for a break. So, it's all about attention. What is your attention on? Now, if you can develop the capability to have your attention on this particular shot and the process that you go through, then you actually need to switch that attention off in between shots. So I think the great skill of golf is to be able to focus appropriately and then come out of that. I think you mentioned the zone. To me, the zone is a byproduct of just being absorbed in the task.
Right, okay, I see.
The task of this particular shot, you're so fascinated by the shot that there's nothing else in your mind. Your attention is being pulled elsewhere.
Okay, so I personally only ever work well when I've got one sort of swing thought. Do you reckon that's like part of key of almost the pre-shot routine? Is it just gives you something to focus on other than the shot?
I liken it a little bit to meditation in the sense that an experienced meditator will sit down and they have a mantra in the sense that they will have a focus point, and that mantra might be a word, it might be a focus on the breath, but they will know what they're going to focus on when they meditate. They don't just sit down and think,
and it just happens.
Up today.
I see.
So there's discipline in meditation, and it's the same in golf. If you have the discipline to put your attention on similar things every time you play, you get better and better at that. You'll never be perfect because the nature of the mind is to jump around.
Right,
One thing for certain is if you don't have routines, you will literally be here, there and everywhere.
Right, okay, got you. Another point, recently in today's Golfer actually, there was an article about practice.
Yeah.
And I know that you like to focus the attention on practice and having a bit of a consequence. So do you reckon that it's potentially hindering to your game if you're not practicing correctly?
I've often said I would never have had any kind of role in coaching if golfers practice correctly. We're one of the very few sports that we practice in a context that is totally dissimilar to the context that we're playing. You know, a footballer will spend a lot of time on a football field, I would imagine. A tennis player spends a lot of time on a tennis court. A snooker player spends a lot of time on a snooker table, and yet a golfer spends loads of time on a driving range. But you have a perfectly flat line into a big field and with the same club.
Like you say, it doesn't really matter, does it?
So it's not that doesn't mean to say that doesn't have its place to build skills and build repetition. But a golfer needs to understand that every session should have a separation. Once they've done some work on the mechanics, that they then create a little bit more game simulation.
I see, okay. And do you believe there's any other factors that can sort of help or hinder mental performance, such as like health or?
Definitely, without question. You know, the brain can only be as good as the mind can only be as good as the sort of, you know, the brain's functionality, and a brain can only function when it's well fed, when it's hydrated.
That's it.
I think that the next big frontier in golf will be understanding how nutrition can assist things like concentration and things like mood control. I think a lot of ineffective mood control on a golf course may be because of, you know, poor nutrition. You've been out there for 3.5 hours, you've not eaten anything, you've not drunk anything, and you wonder why you feel grumpy. Well, that's gonna happen. And I think, you know, the more research that can be done on this and understanding what's the best way for a golfer to hydrate, what are the best foods that they can use, and, you know, it's something I've become more interested in over the last few years.
Excellent, nice one. So, do you think there's any sort of correlation between the guys that are more into their exercise and actual fitness and the guys that are actually doing well at the moment, that are mentally, I say mentally strong, but are more adaptable to the things that you put to them?
I think one of the things that we've always thought over the years is that you think certain things in your mind, and that affects your body. So a person who's feeling a little bit miserable will be thinking certain things and the body reacts, but a lot of research now is suggesting it's the other way around as well, that your body affects the way that you think. So poor posture, slump posture, bad fitness, the poor fitness, things like that can actually affect your mental state. So I think the guys who are training, yes, there's a physical benefit to it, but I also see there's a huge mental benefit to it as well, because you feel better. You feel better when you've been in the gym. You know, inevitably posture probably improves, the way that you carry yourself. I think we all know that when we feel you know, in better shape, we carry ourselves better, we feel more self-confident. So I think all of those things are a nice byproduct. Obviously, if you're stronger and more flexible, that's going to help your mechanics in your golf swing.
That's right, definitely.
But I think from a mental perspective, there's a huge crossover with physical conditioning and the nutrition that I mentioned earlier.
Big part of it. I mean, even yourself there, I can mention, as soon as we started talking about posture and the way you carry yourself, your own posture then got a little bit bigger and you sat a little bit taller.
That's right.
And it displays confidence in what you're doing and what you're saying. It's easy
the message
to see.
from the body is, if you're carrying yourself in a certain way, the message from body to brain is things are okay.
That's it.
If you're this way, the message is you're scared, you're fearful, you're apprehensive. So.
That's right, exactly. So, I mean, just as a note of that, I mean, your posture potentially, if we're carrying a bag, we tend to get our head down. Just walking around with posture with your head down, is that really going to open up to negative thoughts?
I mean, you know, from my understanding, when our posture drops and our eyes go down, we're much more likely to activate the sort of internal dialogue part of our mind. We're much more likely to go inside and start beating ourselves up. So, one of the things I was working with players is be very aware of your eye line. You know,
keep looking at the flagstick.
You can control. And definitely, you know, carrying a heavy bag and being this way.
That's it, exactly.
It's not the best thing. I think that's why, you know, it feels great having a caddy.
Yeah, that's it.
You can suddenly walk in a completely different posture.
That's it, exactly. Okay, so the big question then, if a golfer was to introduce the mental component, practice with consequence, had addressed the nutritional needs and looked at physical limitations, how much of a difference could they make without actually looking at their swing technically and changing anything?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of all those things, really. You know, I'm the first to say that the best mind in the world with a dreadful golf swing will still hit a lot of bad shots. So I think the great beauty of the game now is there's a lot of different disciplines for people to look at. I think